Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Megan Castillo. I'm Town Hall's program manager. On behalf of Town Hall Seattle, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's live stream presentation with professor and historian Dr. Daudi Abe and local rapper and business owner Gio Kwabayan. As we get underway, I would like to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continued use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is proud to be a community-focused organization and a place where we can share and sustain ideas and creativity, even if it means we can't gather in person. I'd like to thank Daudi and Gio for appearing tonight to help make that possible. Dr. Daudi Abe is a Seattle-based writer, professor, researcher, and historian. He is currently a professor of humanities at Seattle Central College and the author of 6 in the Morning, West Coast Hip Hop Music, 1987 to 1992, and the Transformation of Mainstream Culture, published in 2013, and From Memphis to Mogadishu, The History of African Americans in Martin Luther King County, Washington, 1858 to 2014. An extended article published in 2014 that you can find at blackpast.org. His work has appeared in The Stranger and the Seattle Times, and he has appeared on national media such as MSNBC and The Travis Smiley Show. Dr. Abe holds an MA in Human Development and earned a PhD in Education from the University of Washington. Gio Kwabayan is half of the rap duo Blue Scholars, formed in 2002, and is synonymous with the hip-hop scene in Seattle. Blue Scholars' first self-titled album was released in 2004 and named Album of the Year by Seattle Weekly. Blue Scholars has toured the country, opening for such notable acts as Kanye West and De La Soul. Gio is also co-owner with his wife, Shara Umlong, of Hood Famous Bakery, which now has 2 locations, one in Ballard and one in the International District. Dr. Abe's book, Emerald Street, A History of Hip Hop in Seattle, is the subject of today's talk. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Daudi Abe and Gio Kwabayan.
My pleasure to be here. What's up, Gio?
Oh man, Dr. Abe, I'm good, man. I miss you. I miss Town Hall. You good?
I would love to be with you in person in front of our people right now, but
right.
You know what I'm saying? This is the next best thing.
Indeed. All right, so we can just jump right into it. I mean, we, in full disclosure, we did chop it up. Yeah, I mean, we talked for a long time at the station. Shout out to the station.
We basically did the show yesterday. We basically did this hour and a half of conversation yesterday. I just hope today's can live up to how great yesterday's was.
Yeah, so I think we should, we could just pick up where we left off yesterday, or actually go deep, and go to the book itself, which I know you. How long did you work on this book for? I know we did an interview.
Well,
that long.
Well, so the actual beginnings of it was a request from Charles Boudede at The Stranger in 2006 to write like 1,000-word history of local hip hop as part of kind of like a larger package, kind of hip hop package that we're doing. And, just a little bit into kind of researching and getting into it, I was like, there's probably a book here. And so after, at that time, having my hands full with the 6 in the Morning manuscript, and once that was done, the 6 in the Morning, then I was able to really kind of focus in and write it. And, it was a good long stretch of researching, first of all, and then getting in touch with people and making schedules meet. I mean, you know how that is when you're trying to hook up with people, and so it was a good long stretch, but it's great to be here at this point now.
Yeah, and how long was the research part of it, and then the writing part of it, and then the peer editing and whatever, Yeah.
I spent 4 years in the doctoral program at the University of Washington, and about a good 2 year and a half, 2 years of that was actually researching and writing the dissertation. So this was probably about the entire 4 years of doing the researching and the writing, and so it was good though. I mean, it's what people like academics. I mean, it's kind of what we do. So and I have to say that it's always good when teaching students, and if there's like a project or something that they have to do, and if they're selecting a topic, I'm always saying try to find something that you can tie in that you really love and that you're really connected to. And so it was work, but it wasn't work because it combines two of the things that made the kind of biggest influences that made me who I am, which is hip hop and the city of Seattle, two things that I love dearly. So it was definitely a labor of love.
Yeah. And, dawned on me that through all our talks, and we didn't even talk about it yesterday, but I think now that we got an audience in front of us, what was your entry point into the local hip hop scene?
My entry point was in the fall of 1979 when my father took me to Dirt Cheap Records, which was on the corner of 22nd and Union. And, I'm 9 years old at that time. And, when you're a kid, you're kind of at the mercy of what your parents listen to. And so, but for some reason, at this point, he was like, go pick a record. And I literally walked around the store and I focused on one record. And the reason that I focused on the record was because of the logo. It was a very kind of swirling, multicolored logo, and it reminded me of candy. I'm 9 years old. It reminds me of candy. And this is of course, the logo for Sugar Hill Records. And that record was Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. And it literally, I stumbled across it and it literally changed my life.
Rapper's Delight. So you know that word for word, huh? You could.
Well, so here's the thing. So first of all, it was a vinyl record, just so people remember vinyl, and it was the single, and on the one side, on the A side, it was the radio edit, which was about 4 or 5 minutes long. But on the B side was the extended version, and that was about 15 minutes long, man. And if you remember that song, man, in the extended version, there's no bridge. There's no hook. It is like 15 minutes of just rap. You know what I'm saying? And so I'd probably say, within a couple of days after getting that record, I knew all the words to the 15-minute version. I mean, that's how much I played it out and was just obsessed with listening to it and hearing what they were talking about. And they're talking about, after school, I take a dip in the pool, which is really on the wall. I got a color TV so I can see the Knicks play basketball. And I remember thinking, I like basketball. At that time, we had a black and white TV. And I was like, I would like to watch basketball on a color TV. So the kinds of things that they were saying just spoke immediately to a young kid my age.
Yeah. And was it just you or were a lot of your friends into it too?
It was everybody.
Yeah.
It was everybody. It was everybody who I knew who listened to it and then was kind of, reciting it. But then it kind of it moves, and I'm not even an artist. I've never even rhymed in front of anybody. But people I know are kind of then, in order to make it relevant, we don't have subway trains here, and we don't have 30-story project buildings like that. So in order to make it relevant, you start rhyming about what was essentially the Northwest kind of cultural stockpile at the time.
Right. And at the time, this was on the outside looking into New York, but it seemed like shortly after that, it wasn't too long before it started indigenizing here, or I guess you could say some homegrown.
No, you're right. And I think that's kind of what happened around the country. I mean, I think people kind of just started realizing, well, you can't, if New York is the Mecca and kind of the center of where it starts, you can kind of be like New Yorkish for a little bit, but eventually, because of those signals, like the one I just kind of quoted in Rapper's Delight, which is kind of a geographic specific reference to New York, talking about the Knicks, you need to talk about things that are specific to your area. And I think that there are a couple of things that we should keep in mind when we're talking about the kind of foundational context for how hip hop develops here in the Seattle area and in the Northwest, kind of larger speaking, is the Black experience here is there's a very kind of self-congratulatory kind of attitude about how we approach race up here. A lot of kind of patting ourselves on the back. And I get a lot of feedback from people saying, well, at least we're not Alabama. And I'm like, come on, yo, that's a pretty low, you know what I'm saying? That's not really a high bar. but there is kind of context for why this place has a progressive reputation here. And if I may, I would like to read maybe a paragraph or so out of this book to really kind of highlights what I'm saying.
Please do.
The first African American arrived here in the 1880s. His name was in 1858. I'm sorry, his name was Manuel Lopez. And so the question of why, right? Why were African Americans coming here? So I'm quoting here from the book. African American settlers who first came to Seattle in the mid-19th century were drawn by the region's free air, meaning the absence of the most blatant policies and practices of racial discrimination that were a part of everyday life for Black people in the Southern United States. African American men, for example, routinely participated in civic life in Seattle at a time when voting prohibitions and terrorist tactics drove post-Reconstruction era African Americans away from the polls in other regions of the country. Black men in Washington voted throughout the territorial period, and the Washington Territorial Suffrage Act of 1883 briefly made it possible for Black women to cast ballots until that law was struck down by the Territorial Supreme Court in 1887. Although it would be incorrect to claim that racism and discrimination in the Pacific Northwest was never an issue, those dynamics certainly look different in Seattle than they did in other parts of the United States. And so it's look, the issues of voting even today and access to voting are a separate conversation, but we're talking about the 1880s when Black men and women were voting for a time here. And so that's just kind of one example about, especially if you kind of contrast it to Oregon's history, our next door neighbor to the south, you know what I'm saying, and how they were approaching, whether or not they wanted Black people to come and live in that state, which at first they said no. You know what I mean? And so that's one part. But then the other part is around the idea of geographic kind of isolation. Right. Because we are up here in this kind of corner of the country. And you see, am I playing it off? I'm looking for the for the next part. I'm gonna oh, here we go. This kind of corner of the country. So if you think about the four corners of the United States, and we say the capitals, that aren't really the capitals, but I'm just saying kind of like the cultural capitals. You might say New York in the Northeast, and maybe Miami in the Southeast, and Los Angeles in the Southwest. Well, there's no question that Seattle is the capital of the northwestern portion of the country. And one thing that I would say distinguishes Seattle from those other places that I just named is that there are significantly, there are big, well-sized cities kind of relatively close to all those other three places that I mentioned, except for here. And here, the case for here is that, no disrespect to Portland, but anytime you say no disrespect, you're about to be disrespectful.
Yes.
But so going south, the next largest city is San Francisco, the Bay Area. And that's 800, 900 miles away. And then going east, the next largest city there is Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is about 1,500 miles away. Now, all of the cities within and in between may not necessarily be population centers, but there are consumers of culture at every point along the way. And to a large degree, those consumers of culture look to Seattle as the capital, kind of the cultural capital of this large kind of country within a country, if you want to look at it like that. And they looked here for trends and kind of leaders in culture, and that's things like glass arts and newspapers and music, and that also kind of relates to hip hop. And so just the large kind of geographic reach of this area is something that is not always acknowledged, but it is something that sets this area apart from those other areas of the country I was just mentioning.
Right. Like if you came from a big city, chances are it took a long way to get here. And a lot of people who come here end up here and then end up digging in a little bit. So going back to the record store though, it was a physical record, right? That was your entry point, and for a lot of people in Seattle in the neighborhood. And what neighborhood was this in?
Oh, this was a central district.
The central, right?
This was literally where on the corner where Richlands used to be on 23rd and Union, on the northwest corner of the intersection, where now is the big PCC building.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a thread between that record store, this community that connects, and I'm wondering what those threads are with what's going on in New York and the Black community in New York, and like who's responsible, because this is pre-internet, this is pre hip hop being a thing that mainstream media is talking about. What were the communication threads that led to this record going from there to here and into your hands?
It was kind of the Rapper's Delight represented kind of like for a lot of people, it was like, oh, it came out of nowhere, but it actually didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of actually, most of the 1970s, just kind of hip hop, the four different elements kind of coalescing and coming together. And Sylvia Robinson, who was head of Sugar Hill Records, who displayed visionary, forethought by, using the sample for the chic disco smash Good Times as the beat for Rapper's Delight, was, kind of able to package at least what was happening at that time and export it out to the rest of the country, really the rest of the world, as kind of this kind of an early version of a corporatized version of hip hop. Because a lot of people in New York looked at Rapper's Delight and was like, this is whack, man. You know what I'm saying? It talks about I guess I should say, as I talk about in the book, a lot of people in New York weren't feeling Rapper's Delight, and they were looking at Sugar Hill Gang as fraudulent and not of the original scene that was happening there. So there was definite pushback as far as that goes. But as far as it relates to here and what's happening here, part of the geographic isolation that I was referring to also speaks to a license, kind of a creative license that people have here. And so I'm quoting from the book here, and it's in this sequence that I'm leading up to. It's talking about how New York, Los Angeles in this time in the 80s. Even if you hadn't been to those places, there were enough kind of representations within media and movies and television to kind of give you a sense of what it was like, even if you hadn't been there. Well, those cultural representations of Seattle weren't really as present or prevalent, kind of as we see them now back in the 1980s. And so the idea of people not feeling pressured to copy other people was present. It was tangible amongst artists in this city. I'm quoting here: Seattle's rap music, not weighed down as much by a deep history of existing imagery, thus presented a unique opportunity for innovative lyricists to reimagine and represent the city. Bruce Pavitt, co-founder of the alternative label oriented Sub Pop label, argued, quote, "One advantage Seattle has is our geographical isolation. It gave a group of artists a chance to create their own sound instead of feeling pressured to copy others." And I think that what that looks like, at least in early kind of mid to late 80s Seattle hip hop, is someone like Sir Mix-a-Lot and the song Posse on Broadway. Now, if you remember that song was released in 1987, and 1987 is right on the kind of edge of gangster rap becoming super, super popular and just becoming essentially kind of taking over the mainstream of hip hop. Now, in that song, the kind of key sequence of that song is they're up at Dick's on Broadway, and there's a little some beef between Mix-a-Lot's crew and another crew, and Mix-a-Lot and his crew intervene as a man is about to physically assault his girlfriend, and they do so using mace. And now, so that's not exactly what gangster rappers were talking about at that time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Ice-T was not exact. In fact, in the song 6 in the Morning, Ice-T is literally talking about beating a woman down in the middle of the street in that song. And in terms of like NWA, any conflict that they got into would be solved with like an AK-47 or an Uzi or a shotgun or something like that. And so just using that to kind of highlight the fact that artists from here who have made it, in fact, all three of the Grammy-winning rappers who hail from here have either won their Grammy or kind of got their kickoff doing things that were not necessarily within what everybody else was doing in mainstream hip hop at the time.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday. I thought about it pretty much the over the past 24 hours, like, things that are almost stereotypical to hear, like when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl and people were in the streets and partying, and then when the street lights came on, they went to the sidewalks to allow cars go through, and then they,
right.
In
the midst of the Super Bowl party, waiting for the walk light so you can cross the street.
Right.
That's most Seattle.
And that line, from Posse on Broadway,
but I mean, so if I use the other two examples of Diggable Planets, Ishmael Butler, Garfield High School, class of '87, went to New York and formed that group. They win a Grammy Award for the song "Rebirth of Slick," cool like that. And you know what I'm saying, the whole Diggable Planets thing was about they were casting themselves as insects, and they were part of a colony, and they were talking about Marx and socialism. The song on their first album, La Femme Fatale, is a pro-choice anthem. It name checks Roe versus Wade. That's not really, there wasn't really a lot of mainstream hip hop people who were doing kind of taking that approach. And then, obviously Macklemore, two of his biggest songs are Thrift Shop and Same Love. And, those two things go against two of the most tightly held norms of mainstream hip hop, which Thrift Shop going against Bling, which is the whole, flashy jewelry, name brand clothes thing, and Same Love going against the other thing, which is as old as hip hop itself, and that's homophobia.
Yeah, man, it's true, and it resonates. It resonated with me. I think the Diggable in particular for me, from my era, I think I was like in 7th, 8th grade when the first album came out, and then in high school or just a couple years later when Blowout Cone came out. And yeah, that was my introduction to. I found out who Mumia was because of Diggable Planets. That was the first time I heard "We Be Reading Marx Where I'm From," and I owe that to hip hop. I owe what eventually became my politicization from lines like that, and not knowing what it was, but gravitating towards it, and then almost like it was a window and a door to something else that I found myself in, and a lot of us did, and then similar to you. So let's talk about how yesterday. Let's keep going with this train about what's unique about Seattle, because like you said, from New York outward, primarily within Black communities, record stores, neighborhoods, but then also with wherever it landed, whoever was there, regardless of background, but usually working class, right? And then later we see a bigger proliferation. But you argue that the way it's embedded itself here in Seattle, and who participated, and the way they participated, and what's made them stand out from other scenes, other cities, is something that needs to be documented and shared. So let's dive a little deeper into what else makes our scene unique to others.
I think that so KRS-One, who is growing up my musical hero, who I had a chance to meet one time, said that 2 times actually I met him, said that hip hop is less about race and ethnicity and more about skill, authenticity, and ideology. And so a multi-ethnic kind of hip hop scene that develops here is, it kind of goes back to the beginning. If the first group to really kind of generate noise in this area was the Emerald Street Boys, kind of very early on, their DJ was Nasty Ness Rodriguez, who worked at K-Fox, played on K-Fox, and had the very first rap radio show on the West Coast, Fresh Tracks. But I think an excellent example, just a great example, is kind of the story of Fever One and Jerome Ski. So Fever One is a rapper. Sorry, he's a b-boy. Fever One is a b-boy. He started breaking in the early 80s, and we went to middle school together, coincidentally, in the building that now houses the Northwest African American Museum, if you can believe that, as middle schoolers. And so I'm seeing him, and he, gets good and is a part of, some famous early crews like Seattle Circuit Breakers. And so he leaves after graduation and goes to New York City, and ends up being invited to join Rocksteady Crew. Now, anybody that knows about hip hop history and knows about Rocksteady Crew, it is the hip hop equivalent of like the Alvin Ailey Dance Company or like the Joffrey Ballet. You know what I'm saying? And Crazy Legs is its principal, its director. And Crazy Legs invites Carter, Fever One, to join. And so that is a Seattle breakdancer at being, invited to join Rocksteady Crew. To me, in terms of prestige and what that means, is right up there with a Grammy Award in terms of like the equivalency of music and dancing and hip hop and that kind of thing. And so, not being just content being a member of Rocksteady Crew, which is great in of itself, he comes back to Seattle and starts working with young people up at Jefferson Community Center. And Jefferson Community Center kind of becomes the mecca for breaking here in Seattle. And Fever is working with kids, and he spots this one young man named Jerome. Fever's a white guy. He went to Ingram. Jerome is a Filipino guy. He's from Burien. He comes and he starts coming to Jefferson because, he wants to be, he's heard about Fever, and he's heard about DVS Crew. And he wants to, he hears they're getting down at Jefferson, so he wants to be part of it. And Carter sees him. Fever sees Jerome. And Jerome may not have been the best breaker, but there was kind of a focus and a sense around him that Fever kind of was they gravitated toward each other. And, through Fever's mentorship, Jerome goes on to co-found in the late 90s the Massive Monkeys Crew. And Massive Monkeys goes on to win a world championship in 2004 at the World B-Boys Masters at Wembley Stadium in London, England. And then they go on to win in 2012 the R16 in South Korea. The R16 was so cold that not only had no American crew ever won it, no American crew had ever even made the finals before Massive went and won that. And so I just think that is a fantastic example of how community focused so much of the hip hop activity is around here in this city. You have this person who has achieved literally, there's no more famous crew you can join as a breaker than Rocksteady. Okay. But he comes back and uses that as leverage to bring young people and use kind of hip hop as a lens for education and community service. And so I just think, and now Massive has opened their own studio down in the ID, the Beacon. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so it's just a fantastic, just kind of case study of how community focused local hip hop has been and continues to be in terms of creating spaces for young people to exercise their kind of creative energy and kind of find out who they are artistically. And, I can't necessarily make a direct comparison between here and other local scenes, but I have a hard time believing that there is a more community focused or kind of community centric local hip hop scene than there is here.
Yeah. And I have to agree. And those reverberations go beyond it's, I know the book talks a lot about Seattle proper and the Northwest as a region. And I can definitely say my era of this was like early mid to late 90s. Well, just say 90s. We all knew on the Bremerton side, we knew who Fever One was. There were B-boy breakdance crews out there too. And that was even more so than going to concerts to see so and so coming to town to perform. It was more so the battles. That was really what it was. And the majority of those were in the community center. In community centers, I remember they would have them at the Filipino Community Center here. Kids from Tacoma, Bremerton, North End, South King County would come to these things. It'd be like 500 people there, and if you were like 4 or 5 rows back, you had to like stand on somebody's shoulders or like be up at the wall. You weren't there, but you were still You couldn't see. You couldn't see inside the circle, but you still reacted when everybody reacted, and you try to what's going on there. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it's conducive, right? It's literally a circle of people sharing space in movement, and you can't replicate that. You can't replicate that unless you're just there and participating in that energy, which is inherently something communal.
The
right?
cipher, the circle, 360 degrees. There's so many kind of references within hip hop vernacular to that concept of circular and kind of perpetual motion. So that's great. But okay, listen. So you didn't think that I was going to let you get out of here without turning the tables at least a little bit, because in the book there is a good mention of you and your work and your creativity.
Well, I hope so, man. We talked for what, like 6 hours at the station that one day?
That's right. The station is shouted out in the acknowledgments, because I did a bunch of interviews there at the old spot.
Yeah,
the new spot is great, but we were out on the deck at the old spot.
Oh,
but
yeah, I missed it.
But so please share with us a little bit before we go to the Q&As, and this will be the last kind of section here before we turn it over to the Q&As. Tell us a little bit about, you've had some time to kind of reflect on your journey, you and Sabzi's journey as Blue Scholars, and you definitely brought a level of social consciousness to the local scene that was much needed. And so I'm just wondering, in the time that you've had to kind of reflect, how you look back on the experiences and what you all had to say, and what the legacy of that might be today.
Well, yeah, I have had time to reflect in ways that I haven't, and I think the pandemic definitely accelerated that. I do have to correct you, though. I hate correcting, a mentor, but you said we brought something. I would say rather that we tapped into something that was pre-existing, and maybe added to it, maybe did our own thing with it. But I mean, you said it yourself. There is something of a the caveat being the pat your back attitude here, but there is relatively a kind of progressive spirit out here. I recognized it very early on, and maybe unconsciously, but just knowing that I talked to other Filipino kids who are into hip hop in other places, and for whatever reason, I didn't feel like it was not possible here. Like, by the time I came into being, I was going to these battles, like I said, these b-boy battles, rap battles, freestyle ciphers, and I saw myself reflected in those spaces already. Then I go watch TV and then not see anything. But on a local level, on a community level, I didn't. The questioning of whether I belong or not came later, actually. Like, it was like no question from the jump. And then I go and listen to Rap Attack and this Filipino DJ playing the music. So I definitely had a lot of time to think about the kind of things that you think about, like how much of this place and what is unique about this place influenced me, provide me a path to do what I do. And it was everything. It was everything. I mean, I grew up in Hawaii before moving here, but I think about what it might have been if I remained there. I think I had a creative energy that would have came out anyway in some other way. But what would that have led me to be able to reach an audience, to feel like I could actually do this, both for a living and in ways to collaborate with other people. And I think the answer is no. And again, like I think it would have came out some other way, but something about this place and all the things that you cite in your book and in the conversations, I do agree with. This kind of progressive spirit. I think that all the economic forces that brought so many different people of colonized backgrounds into this place, who kind of I see I'm stumbling because I don't want to like say things like melting pot. That doesn't know justice. And I hear other people say it and I cringe, and I know what they mean and I know the intent behind it. But it's a lot more complicated than that. But the multi-ethnic character, which I hope, we've seen it change. I think both you and I are definitely of the years where we can say back then this it was all Black and brown people on this corner, and I hope that remains. As much as things have changed, I hope what does remain remains, and what is gone somehow comes back. And maybe that's wishful thinking on my part, but it's also part of what Blue Scholars was at the time and what it is now. And I know we haven't been as active musically. Saba, I think he put out some stuff recently, and continues to stay creative. I've jumped in since into the hospitality industry, so I still write. I still got my little setup over here.
Well, come on, man! You were just on the thing. What, like a month ago with the Seattle, all in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, come on.
I mean, that
was
it hasn't gone. It hasn't gone away. It's just that I got into what it became was I was in that cycle, right, of like hunker down, create, disappear for a little bit, prepare the thing that you're about to share with the world, and then you go through the cycle of putting it out, just spending your time and resources into pushing this project that you work so hard on. If you're fortunate enough to tour on that, then you do so, which we got finally after many years got to that point. And yeah, just the time, energy, resources, it's been harder to do in recent years than before, and maybe it'll never be that way again. But that the spirit that was there at the impetus remains. It's just being channeled differently through the business I run with my wife, through my older son, who is now a musician himself, and we share headphones.
Family business.
Yeah, and try maintaining my distance when I can, but then mentoring in ways. And it's actually his reaction to, he grew up hearing my music, but I think I was always just pops. It was just there. He's even been on stage, and when I asked him about it, he was like, I think I kind of remember that. But something happened, I think, and it happened when he started making music himself. And then being the age that he is, I remember, so he's 16 now, but he really started getting into music at 14. And when I was 14, that was 1994, that was when Illmatic came out. And I remember that, even though I had been a hip hop head for a while, something clicked there where it hit me intellectually, emotionally, just very viscerally. And I think the same thing happened to him. So I think he's gone back and listened to his pops' music, in ways that he hasn't before, and just little things he says. On one hand, I'm like, how did you not know this? Or he'll make little comments like, oh, I didn't know you went on this tour, or he's getting schooled on like some of the 80s and 90s hip hop. And I'll just casually mention like, oh yeah, I did a song with that person. Oh yeah, I went on tour with them. And he's like, what? No, you didn't. So what I think, if he thinks it's a big deal, from someone who's quite possibly, he's not unbiased, but in a way, if he's impressed or it's making an impression on him, that's what matters to me most. And I think I'm realizing in a way that I didn't before, that a similar effect might have been had on anyone who listens to the music. I mean, I should have known this because that's how powerful it was to me. Like I mentioned before, like listening to Diggable, I look back, I'm like, wow, that put me on this path. So to think that I've, even in a small way, might have done that for someone else and may even continue to do so because the music is out, even though I haven't been active, it means a lot. I think about when you talk about the ripple effects of Fever doing what he did, I aspire towards that. I hope I'm aspiring, and I'm doing that in my way, whether with music or food or whatever. But that's always what's been important to me is to know that I play some kind of part in a ripple effect that inspires someone else in the same way people in this culture inspired me.
That's phenomenal. That let me just say two things. First of all, the fact that you were able to earn and make a living off of your creativeness, off your creativity is incredible. I mean, how many people actually get to that point? Not that many.
Yeah.
And look, I appreciate your pushback, but I mean, I'm saying that what you brought was the thing that no one else could have brought because it came from you, and your uniqueness and individuality are the things that push that. And yeah, I told you yesterday, man, I've said this in class. In fact, I've had my class kind of dig into that one Joe Metro line. The one where the Native American elder is getting off the bus and he says, "Have a good day, you foreigners." I love that. I tell the class there's so much to unpack in that one single line. That is just, it's unbelievable. So I salute you, and I appreciate, the artistic and kind of critical social consciousness that you help contribute to the local scene. That's what's up.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad that it evoked a chuckle, because I try to do. I know I approach heavy topics. I'm talking about colonization and all these things, and I'm putting them into this song. But I'm not trying to just tell you the obvious.
And that's the thing. There's nothing really funny about that line. I mean, if you think about the historical context, I'm laughing at it because it's so brilliant, but there's nothing really to laugh at. I just love that through the lens of hip hop, you can deliver a line like that, and it's a fly rhyme, but at the same time, it's giving you so much subtext and kind of critical history to think about. That's to me, that is the one of the unique things that hip hop has to offer.
I appreciate that, and like I said, I tapped into it somehow. It existed before me, but I'll take it. I'll take because I know what. There were definitely challenges, and it took some work, and it took mentorship. It took a lot of people in this scene telling me straight up I was whack, and me going back into my bedroom and figuring out what I needed to do to be a little less whack. I appreciate all those things. So thank you.
Nah, man, I appreciate you, and I've been saying this to so many people who I'm running into. I mean, I'm like the least important person around here because all I'm doing is, and I don't say that to diminish the work I put in. Believe me, I put in massive work. I'm just saying that if not for people like you and what you were doing, there's nothing for me to write about. You know what I mean? I'm just here kind of round up some details and document, but really the stars of the show and the people who really matter are the people who are actually not only have the courage to be creative like that, but also to put it out into the world, because that's not an easy thing to do, and not everybody's ready to do that. And it can be, you can get your feelings hurt real easy, and so it takes courage to do that on a consistent basis. And so I have tremendous amount of appreciation for you and everybody else that is taking that step and put themselves out there, because this is what you're feeling, and this is how you're expressing your creative self.
I appreciate that. And likewise, thank you for doing the research, documentation, and more than that, contextualizing, bringing it to the present, not just documenting for documenting's sake, but to truly put a lens on what's going on now and how explaining how we got here. And more than that, a path forward, right? As
I do want to say, and I'm glad you made that point. I do want to say, so we can go to questions here after this, but I just want to say that I purposefully titled this book A History of Hip Hop in Seattle, because I know that you're not going to be able to, book itself is like, around 200 pages of text and then notes and timeline and stuff like that. So you're never going to be able to fit 40 years of history into that few pages. But what I hope it can serve as kind of a jump off point for future scholars and researchers to kind of expand, because in all honesty, I just talked a little bit about Fever and Jerome Ski and that kind of, you could write a book about Seattle, or an entire book about Seattle breaking itself. I mean, there's enough there to fill up some pages. And so I'm hoping that people, in future, our children, maybe our children's children, are able to kind of use this as kind of a jump off point, a stepping stone to really kind of maybe even dig a little bit further into the details of maybe some of the stuff that didn't get all the way covered in this book, and kind of tell those stories as they appear to them in their own lives and experiences.
Indeed. So that's everybody out there watching, right? Somebody's got to write the second and third and fourth and fifth book on this subject and add a little bit to it.
We're here to pass the torch, or at least I am. You're young. You're still young. I'm here to pass the torch.
Indeed. So we jump into these questions then?
Oh, yep. Let's go. Are there questions?
All right. Questions? Yeah. I just I can go ahead and read them.
Sure.
We have this is from Candace from Town Hall. For both Dr. Abe and Gio, you've offered a lot of love for the city and its ability to foster your work. What are some of the hardships that are related to the city that your work has helped you process? Hardships related to the city.
That's a good question.
Real good question.
You got something?
I do. I think I'm clicking on the wrong. I just the question got really big on my screen and you got really small. Yeah, oh man. How much time we got?
There's no hard number out. So you got as much time as you want.
You know what? I love Seattle. I love the region. And it's kind of cliche, some love-hate relationship, I guess you could say. A lot of I wouldn't call them hardships though. I would just say they range from mild annoyances to serious obstacles to being seen and heard out here. And I would definitely say the
Well, how
you
about,
know what? I'm gonna pass, but
I
let
would
it come back to me.
Okay, yeah, I would just say, as I'm thinking about it, I would think about somebody like Dre's, and Dre's had a couple of songs so the book goes up to 2015, and he had a couple of songs just right at the very edge that are in there and talked about. And one of them is The Hood Ain't the Same. And he's talking about gentrification. And it's kind of an outline of gentrifying and kind of landmarks that were there that are not that are not there anymore. And, you know, talking about like, you know, I think probably one of the most symbolic ones was right there on the corner of 23rd, or rather MLK and Cherry, the building that used to house the Facts, which was Seattle's oldest Black newspaper, and now houses a doggy kind of daycare spa kind of center.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so if you go from one entity at that corner to another one, and that kind of is a microcosm, if I can call it that, of gentrification and what that looks like to people who have you know, lived here for a long time. And then the other kind of Dre's thing that I'll highlight there is his little piece, Irony on 23rd, where he's talking about the fact that, you know, you have this white-owned dispensary on the exact same corner where for decades people of color, and kind of more specifically Black people, were getting locked up for selling, among other things, marijuana on that same corner. And so I think that kind of pointing out, and there's always been a good piece of political kind of social consciousness within local hip hop, but those kind of more recent examples are things that I think of when, in terms of like hip hop kind of pointing out these things and kind of helping us process what they mean, not only as we kind of put them against the backdrop of history, but also what they mean to us going forward as a city.
Right. Thanks for pointing it out. I think thank you. Also, thank you for giving me time to think and articulate what I was going to try to say. And you know, I think it's still hard to put together. But I was going to say something to the effect of, you know, it's hard to draw the lines of like what progressive is out here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a word that gets thrown around, and I think people don't really know what that means. And what one person calls progressive is not to someone else. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of that. You know, I'll just keep it simple and say it's that very thing, that patting on the back, which, you know,
we're not Mississippi. We're not Alabama.
Right. And then I'm going to say the thing that a lot of people say when they push back on that, when they actually have experienced overt racism, is at least you know who's racist in those places.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's it. Maybe that was my long way of saying that's probably the biggest thing to overcome, is actually not knowing who thinks you belong and who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll never say it out loud, but they'll find other ways to let you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my answer.
That passive aggressive Seattle, you know, bigotry, or whatever you want to call it, bias, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have to be to your face. It's like, let me talk about that. Let me talk about that person after they leave.
Yeah, and I know that we can go on about that. I definitely find myself losing track of time when talking about that with friends and colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump to the next one then.
Okay.
This next question from June on YouTube: what's the impact of Seattle's unique hip hop been on other artists around the country? Is it possible to see reverberations of the unique choices that Seattle artists have made? That is a wonderful question. The influence that our own homegrown folks have made on other.
Well, I think that you know, the backlash that Macklemore kind of faced in terms of making the transition from a local artist to a national artist is somewhat similar to the kind of thing that Mix-a-Lot faced in doing the same thing. But what I will say about Macklemore is that I would argue that within mainstream hip hop, anyway, if you want, I mean, I suppose there might be an argument about, by some people, whether you would consider his music actual hip hop or not. But I'm just saying, within the larger realm of what is considered rap, in hip hop. I feel like that there was a shift, a change in, this brought about a change in tone. Up to that point anyway, what had been in mainstream hip hop had been in terms of how it related to LGBTQ issues, had been overwhelmingly homophobic and demeaning. And so I'm saying that song was the first song, I want to say, that kind of explicitly endorsed gay marriage to make it into the top 40. If I'm not mistaken, I have to look that up, but I think that's right. And in the aftermath of that, you start to see little smaller, kind of examples kind of popping up in the aftermath of that. You have someone like Young M.A., who is a young woman who, I think she's from New York, and she talked about how coming out kind of was the turning point in her career. And this is like in 2015 or so. So it's sometime after that. Also, after Same Love comes out, you have Jay-Z. And on his album 444, I want to say it is, the song Smile discusses his mother being a lesbian. And then also the song Old Town Road by Lil Nas X. While that is breaking records as the longest, number one hit at the top of the Billboard charts or something along those lines, he comes out as gay. And so I can't necessarily say that all that happened simply because of a song like Same Love, which, by the way, is a pro gay marriage song, that a pro same-sex marriage song that is put out by a straight identifying individual. I think that needs to be noted. But it kind of, if you are going to kind of theorize, that song comes out, and then these kind of larger, Jay-Z, who's bigger than Jay-Z in the rap game. And so, saying that Macklemore in that song placed a marker that afterward people could address these issues in a way that they hadn't necessarily done before and leading up to that. I mean, I think there's a discussion to be had there.
Excellent. I was trying to think of an example myself. I would actually have to say so you hear a lot about the quote unquote sounds of other regions, right? The Atlanta sound, the New York sound, and then from one era to the next too. And there's always been that running question of like, well, what is the Seattle sound? And you get many different answers to that, but one that you'll hear a lot is that there is no defining sound here. There are styles that are definitely influenced by things that you may have heard or seen in other places, but the way it comes together here has always been kind of eclectic. Like a lot of the stuff I still listen to that was made locally, a lot of like tribal music, late 90s tribal music. There's a collective out here that to this day I still think a lot of that music stands the test of time. And it's hard to describe, but if I could describe it, there was definitely some like, it wasn't like gangster rap. Even though we're on the West Coast, it sounded more, I guess you could say, quote unquote, East Coastish, almost native tongues vibe, but not. There was like almost like it was like the cloudy, rainy version of that. It sounds like, yeah, it's like if Tribe Called Quest had to live under 8 months of dreariness all the time. So I think, anyway, I was starting to ramble off, but I was going to say the eclecticness. Again, I think similar to you, I'm not saying Seattle is responsible for it. I think the music in general and hip hop in general has moved towards more and more eclecticism of breaking down artificial boundaries around what a genre is supposed to be, what a region sound is supposed to be. but I think the very things that you mentioned are unique. What make this place unique allowed us to be ahead of the curve of that kind of thing. So an eclecticism that when I started seeing artists in the late 2000s, early 2010s make a big deal out of like borrowing an indie rock record and rapping over it and like remixing it and sampling it. We were doing that out here like a good 10, 15 years earlier, and it was no thing. And even the proximity, it's a small town, it's a proximity to the grunge scene, even though it wasn't my thing, just living here, you couldn't avoid it. And I have a familiarity with that a lot of people from outside this region don't have. And maybe even led me to be more open to not just going to the record store and not just going to the hip hop section, but going everywhere. And I felt like everybody was doing that out here. And I think you could hear it in a lot of the producers out here and what they sampled. They weren't just sampling the soul records and the funk records and the jazz records. Out here, it seems like they sampled whatever they could find in the record store, and in a way that I think predated a lot of other scenes. So I would say the one thing is a kind of like eclecticism out here and the no adherence to a sound or a representation that we all had to strive towards. I think the fact that it was kind of the Wild West led to this eclecticism that I think showed other places what is possible when you don't really
not being afraid to take artistic risk, not feeling like you have to, you know what I mean? If you were coming out of LA during that, during the 90s or whatever, you might have probably felt a lot of pressure to be gangster. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But that didn't necessarily, that pressure wasn't necessarily applied here. And I also think it's great that you bring up the whole grunge thing, because as kind of unidentifiable as the Seattle sound might be, as far as hip hop goes, you know what I'm saying? That before grunge was known as grunge, it was called the Seattle sound. And so that was very identifiable in terms of regionally where it came from. So I think the juxtaposition of the Seattle sound, which actually eventually becomes known as grunge, and what is the Seattle sound? And that's still kind of an unanswered question as far as hip hop goes. So I think those two things on those two sides are interesting to kind of,
Yeah. Now you're going to leave me with something else to think about for the next 24 hours. Well, let's see. I think there's a third question here. We have two questions. One I think is specific to me. It says, "How's Hip Famous doing now during the pandemic?" I can get that one out the way real quick. We're floating, just like the entire hospitality industry, and we're doing it with a fraction of the team we had before, unfortunately. But yeah, the team are just, they're holding it down. I'm delivering cheesecakes myself. I got to get up at 5 in the morning. I got to get up at 4:45 in the morning to make it out the house by 5 in the morning to go deliver cheesecakes myself. But we're getting by, and with the massive support of the community, of even people outside of Seattle. I know like online sales have helped pay the bills. So we're hanging in there, and we're not going anywhere anytime soon. We're gonna, just stretch this PPP money and like look at our budget every day. And
you guys serve drinks there, right?
We did. But the bar's been shut down.
In normal times, you did.
In normal times, we did.
Yeah, I can't wait until we get back to normal times, man. We're gonna toss a couple back.
Yeah, and I just want to end by saying like we'll be all right, and I know we'll be all right because I'm just one of the few people in this team that's making it work. And shout out to my wife Shara, who's really like created just a great structure for us to adapt and to be vulnerable with each other. And find a way through this. So thank you for asking. Yeah, come visit us. We're open Thursday through Saturday. Only 2 people allowed in at a time, from 11 to 4 p.m.
Also, I better say shout out to my wife Danielle. I don't want to. Why didn't you shout me out?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to put that
you.
on you.
No, I got you. I was paying attention.
All right. All right. This is the final question of the night, I believe. Has gender representation in hip hop been approached differently in Seattle versus elsewhere in the country? Have female hip hop performers had a different experience in the Pacific Northwest compared to elsewhere?
I can answer a little bit from a man's point of view who did a little bit of some research on it. And I will say that gender diversity in the local scene does go way back just about to the beginning, because right along the Emerald Street Boys were the Emerald Street Girls. And they were very much kind of in the kind of the same vein as Emerald Street Boys, where they were, they were also, I don't maybe didn't mention this earlier, but the Emerald Street Boys were, at that time, hip hop wasn't necessarily as siloed as it was. You're a rapper or you're a DJ or whatever. But you know what I'm saying? Rappers who, like the Emerald Street Boys, would, perform these intricate dance routines while they were performing. And the Emerald Street Girls kind of did the same thing. They were their counterparts. And they did a few kind of high profile shows around here. And then as you keep going, you have people like Erica White, Kylia, who was with Jasiri. You have people like Laura Peace Kelly, even kind of up to today. You have people like Gifted Gab, who's out there doing their thing. So gender diversity has been definitely a presence. Anna Banana with the Massive Monkeys. I don't want to only limit it to music. And so gender diversity has definitely been an active piece of the local scene. I wish we had an actual, woman who was a participant in the scene to actually give us some firsthand kind of knowledge. But just as a man, who is observed, I can definitely say that there has been an active piece of gender diversity that's been a part of the scene from the beginning, just about.
Definitely. And I was pretty much going to say something similar, partially from firsthand experience, and partially from history that Dr. Abe has shared with me. All right. It looks like did another one pop up? No, that was no new questions from the audience. So I think that concludes the questions. Anything else we should add? Got my little flavor magazine here.
I suppose just the obligatory shameless plug here. Emerald Street, A History of Hip Hop in Seattle, published by University of Washington Press, will officially be out on November 15th. Forward by Sir Mix-a-Lot.
That's great. And you can buy that right here tonight. By
you don't even have to wait.
Use the buy the book button or on YouTube. It's in the chat, and that's going to take you right over to Third Place Books, and you can support them. I want to thank you both so much. This has been really fun for me. I still consider myself very much a newcomer to Seattle, so it's so great to hear more of the history of the city. And I want to thank everybody for watching tonight. Thanks for throwing your thanks in the chat and for letting us know where you're listening from. If you want to hear more town hall events, you can follow this Crowdcast channel by clicking the follow button in the top right corner, and check out our calendar also online. So Gio and Dr. Abe, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll see you sometime in person. Have a great night.
Thank you. Gio, love you, man.
Thank you. Love you too, brother.
Yes,
Town
sir.
Hall, thank you.
That's what's up, Town Hall. Thank you.